Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our American audience. And thank you all for joining us today for this NLA NYLON event on tower retrofit, approaches to reuse in London and New York. I'm Florence Maschietto, Head of Professional Programme at NLA, and I'll be your chair this afternoon. For those of you who don't know who we are, NLA is London's built environment community, a cross-sector membership organisation for everyone committed to shaping a better city. Our 30,000 members work across all aspects of city governance, planning, design, development and management, spanning public and private sectors. Across the year, NLA delivers events, research, exhibitions and key flagship events from our home here in London, in the London Centre, as well as activities across the city. We've recently launched our latest report, Adaptive London, Reusing Existing Buildings, that examines the current challenges and opportunities around retrofit and reuse across the capital, drawing on best practice examples from both London and around the world. The report highlights how repurposing existing spaces can extend building lifespans, reduce embodied carbon, and support the UK's net zero targets. You can access the full report on our website at nla.london, along with the details of our broader programming. So today's NYLON session forms part of the wider publication and programme and explores key findings from the report in more detail. Today's session highlights outstanding tower retrofit projects and existing policies from both London and New York, exploring what each city can learn from each other's approach to reuse. We'd like to extend our thanks to KPF and AIA for their continued collaboration in making these series possible. So today we'll hear from developers, architects and policymakers on the benefits and barriers that come with tower retrofit in dense urban areas. Each city will put forward their existing policy frameworks for reuse, as well as an exemplary case study, presenting the ways in which adopting a retrofit approach can meet sustainability targets in tall buildings, revitalise urban areas, and repurpose unused spaces. We then will have time for a panel discussion, followed by an audience Q&A, so please use the Q&A button on Zoom as we go along. Now I'm pleased to welcome our first speaker, Kirsten Kane, Principal Planning Officer for Sustainability at the City of London Corporation. Kirsten will outline the city's retrofit approach and provide an overview of London's evolving policy landscape. Over to you, Kirsten.
Thank you, Kat. Thank you. My name is Kirsten Kane. I'm leading the sustainability team in the City of London planning department. And I'm going to talk about the City of London policy approach to retrofit. So I have to find the button. Sorry. Right. I'm starting with the London policy approach, the sustainability policy context. I will have to mention the London Plan 2021 and the guidance documents that include groundbreaking policies and guidance on energy, circular economy, and whole life cycle carbon assessment. Most people in this room may be familiar with this, but I'm not too sure about our American colleagues. But all I want to say about this is that the London Plan provides a firm basis for our policies and guidance in the city that provide the detail about how we expect applicants to address retrofit and reuse in the City of London. Next slide. So in terms of the City of London, Sorry, I'm struggling with the buttons. The City of London Sustainability Policy Landscape. So this is based on the Climate Action Strategy that was adopted in 2020, and amongst other things is strongly supporting the whole square mile of the city to reach net zero by 2040. And that commitment filters down to our planning policies and guidance through our emerging city plan 2040. There is an update to our current local plan and is going through the examination in public at the moment and will hopefully be adopted in 2026. It contains our retrofit first policy and various sustainable design standards, but the retrofit first policy is something that we use to and implement through the consideration of options as a tool. So we have also adopted the planning for sustainability SPD in February this year. That sets out detailed guidance across 5 key topics. Sorry, SPD, for all who don't know what it is supplementary planning guidance. So it explains in more detail how to implement the policies of our local plan, the city plan. This SPD contains these 5 key topics, and that includes retrofit and reuse, circular economy, and whole life cycle carbon. And I will explain a little bit more about it in the following slides. But very importantly, we also have adopted our carbon options guidance in 2023. And this is a commitment through the climate action strategy. Once the strategy was adopted, a lot of stakeholders in the city asked us to ask developers to explain how they got to the development application schemes details. And so they wanted ask applicants to consider development options to ensure that the lowest carbon options and the lowest construction waste option is considered and chosen for the application scheme. So this carbon options guidance provides the tool to implement our emerging retrofit first approach. And to the next slide. So what is very important for us is that the sustainability focus rests on future-proofing the square mile. And this slide shows the main objectives that drive our policies and guidance, and they have to work positively together to future-proof. And this is a challenging part of our work. And so the main objective is to boost the wider sustainability of the city, not just the sustainability of the individual sites through applications. It is also recognized that each site and buildings are different, so we expect applicants to work out the best balance between reducing carbon emissions and reducing waste. And that should happen through the retrofit first approach and the optioneering methodology, but also take account of other sustainability issues such as climate resilience. We also recognize that high carbon impacts through new development cannot be avoided. So we have introduced, for now, a soft approach to a mitigation mechanism, which we call wider environmental sustainability benefits. These are benefits that are provided by developers and applicants that cannot meet the London Plan's standard benchmark for embodied carbon impact. And they should also reach beyond the red line boundary of the site or beyond current best practice solutions. And a few examples of that a little bit later. So then we have, through demolition and redevelopment, high waste impacts, which we need to tackle first. So we do that through pushing reuse of deconstruction materials. And in our guidance, we include in expectations for applicants for more detailed deconstruction audit information that facilitates reuse of materials more efficiently. There are other issues such as embedded circularity of new development and the incorporation of climate resilience and biodiversity measures that are important for future-proofing the square mile, and therefore that should not be cut short to reduce carbon emissions. Moving on to the retrofit and reuse in practice in the city. So I talked about our optioneering approach, which is the tool to understand the options and opportunities available for a specific site. And this slide shows a few examples of the output. For example, left-hand side, you see an existing tower and options to extend it or redevelop it. And below you see structural impacts and carbon impacts of those works to extend or to extend in different ways. So these optioneering exercises give us a really good idea of what the impacts are and how they should be weighed in the planning decision. We have typical retrofits in the city that are normally late 20th century buildings, as post-war period buildings are often structurally difficult to adapt and to be added to. So an example in an area with height restrictions is this one, 75 London Wall, with good bones, as we call it here, meaning a large percentage of retention is possible, while also adding a fairly large extension. And you can see the options again in this little graph at the bottom here. And then we have another example here that is a site in our tall building clusters where there's still a lot of lower buildings, and where they come forward for redevelopment, applicants now try to retain as much as possible of the existing structure. In this case, they have have developed the existing retained structure into the base for a tower that will be inserted into the site. And that was quite a new idea. So far, we had lots of applications that retain various percentages of basements and foundations to save carbon and demolition waste. And all this is to, especially in our tall building cluster, is to achieve as much office, high quality office floor space as possible. So I talked about wider environmental sustainability benefits. That's an approach to mitigate high carbon impacts from new development. Here's a couple of 4 examples of what that is. Could be. It could be much more urban greening, biodiversity, cool routes, or waste heat transfer from a new building to an existing site, or exemplar efforts to reuse, for example, fit out materials. All this will be really helpful to make sure that the city develops into a sustainable ecosystem, and that it will encourage a more regenerative environment over time in the city. So quickly, a retrofit snapshot. In 2024, we had 16 applications, and about 44% of them were classed as retrofits. And even of the remaining 56%, a lot of applications had a notable retention of some structure. So from compared to the olden days, this is a notable change, and we are quite happy with this as a sort of intermediate stage. And lastly, I would like to quickly talk about that we work with the industry a lot as a kind of reality check, and it's really important to do that to help us to figure out how far we can push applicants to achieve carbon and construction material reduction, and also work out how we can support the industry through so strengthening requirements and so on, and that we were told can develop supply chain and help circular economy to develop quicker, while also ticking the boxes of occupiers to work and live in low energy and low carbon, healthy and resilient buildings. And most importantly, how do we incorporate social sustainability? That's where we have to collaborate very much with our developers, because they need to help us to provide spaces at ground level and roof levels for social activities to make sure that the city is proof for the future. So thank you.
Thank you, Kirsten. A really quick snapshot there, but some really interesting statistics. A great way to kick off the session. I'd now like to pass over to Luke Kelly, Project Director at British Land, that will present Broadgate Tower. Over to you, Luke.
Thank you, Florence. Hi there, my name is Luke Kelly. I work for British Land as a project director. British Land are a FTSE 250 real estate investment trust in the UK. And Broadgate Tower itself is a project that we've been looking at over the last number of years. Broadgate Tower on the north here, as you'll see at the top of this image, it sits on the north of our Broadgate campus, which was originally built in the 1990s by Stanhope. It sits within the City of London, but historically a financial district bounding Shoreditch to the north and Silicon Roundabout. British Land as a company bought into the campus in early 2000s, and Broadgate Tower was built shortly after. to that. And having partnered with GIC in 2013, we've spent the last decade repositioning the wider campus from a financial hub, often sterile outside of working hours, and we're seeking to kind of reposition the campus to a 24 hours a day, 7 days a week mixed-use campus. The campus itself now, as we are kind of developed into that wider master plan, it's 32 acres. The campus includes 4.5 million square feet of workspace, accompanying retail, restaurants, bars, and importantly, public spaces. This is Broadgate Tower to the right of the image here. It was originally constructed circa 20 years ago. It's a circa 550,000 square foot GIA 34-story tower. It was built using raft foundations for the substructure and sits above the train lines leaving Liverpool Street Station. There's therefore no basement, which limits our ability to incorporate facilities below the building. The original architecture of Broadgate Tower is something we're all really proud of at British Land. The bones of the building are also very good, as Kirsten alluded to. So we had a great starting point to address some of the challenges of the building's offer, as we realised in the order of 50% of vacancy across the building as lease events came to a conclusion. We saw the challenges at the time as a lack of street presence, a lack of human scale, and poor amenity offering, considering the requirements of the modern day occupier. The building was a tower of its time, and today's expectations of the occupiers have moved on drastically. The existing building had no dedicated end of trip cycle provision, no terracing, no F&B provision, and a very small reception for a building of its size, impacting its user journey. As I said, the challenge we faced also was that we had 50% of the occupiers in situ during our impending or proposed works, which leaves its own challenges in working within a live environment. So what did that mean in terms of our vision for the space when we set out to review our asset strategy? We had good bones of the building, but we wanted to change first impressions, provide greater presence to the building, and introduce a pavilion outside the front of public realm or private realm, outside of the front of the property. And we're fortuitous with being able to be afforded that opportunity. As I said, there was no basement for us to kind of manipulate the existing building, but being above the Network Rail land. So we had to look at what we could do, one, within the building, and two, outside of the building. So we had a refurbishment within the existing tower, and we sought to add a pavilion to incorporate the additional amenity that we required to compete with new build stock. We also wanted to improve the public realm and the quality of the spaces around the building. And we wanted to focus on sustainability as part of it. So as part of the pavilion, we are reusing steel, 70 tons of steel, to support the steelwork structure. We're targeting EPC A and BREEAM Outstanding, which are leading sustainability accreditations within the UK. We're making use of the existing raft foundations that support the tower. So the over-engineered capacity of the existing building afforded us the ability of using this substructure for free, for want of a better phrase. We are using cross-laminated timber CLT slabs in the pavilion, which offer embodied carbon benefits and also obviously visual appeal. And throughout the tower and reposition, we're adopting circular economy principles throughout, leading to embodied carbon of over phases A1 to A5 of 150 kilograms of CO2 per meter squared across the building. So what does that mean in terms of the amenity provision that we're looking to incorporate and include within the new offer? The existing amenity, the enhanced amenity provision provides for British Council for Officers Guidance end of trip cycle provision in excess of 350 cycle spaces and associated facilities, a 5,000 square foot reception, a 6,000 square foot shared terrace, and a 9,000 square foot amenity floor for the building. We have also incorporated our flexible workspace operator on level 10, which is over 12,000 square feet. As you'll see here, a number of CGIs, but importantly, as I said, I referenced earlier, we sought to improve the quality of the public realm around the building and around our spaces and in between our buildings to improve the biodiversity net gain on the site and improve the user journey for our customers. And here you'll see a CGI of the final design, celebrating the existing architecture of the building, whilst addressing the vision to reposition the tower. The works are on site and are due to complete in late 2026, which is just under an 18-month construction period, which when compared to a new build is obviously a lot less than that. But thank you for your time.
Thank you, Luke. A really insightful showcase, a great example of how to navigate a retrofit project at scale in London. Now we'll move on to the New York speakers. I'd like to invite James Colgate partner Brian Cave Leighton Paisner, a member of Mayor's Office Adaptive Reuse Task Force in NYC. Over to you, James.
Hi, I'm James Colgate, a partner at BCLP. And if you don't know, BCLP is one of the few firms that has a planning and zoning legal practice, both in New York and London. We do work in both places. Before I became an attorney, I guess I still am an architect, so I can think like architects here. And I used to work in city government. I used to work at the city planning department in New York City, the housing department doing affordable housing in New York City, and the buildings department where I did a lot of regulatory stuff. So I'm going to try not to be too legal sounding, but I might anyway. But here goes. Let's see if I can do this and move the slide. There we go. So here I am. You see my pictures. Great. I show this slide just to show how complicated things are in the US and why, unlike in London, where you have this beautiful vision and this unified concept of how you do your retrofits, we just have a patchwork of laws that kind of stumble on each other's feet and make it very difficult to do anything. And trying to fix things to make them better is just adding more to the hodgepodge, right? We have a federal set of laws that govern things with respect to construction in New York City. Maybe that touches flood regulations, things that are more of a federal nature. In New York State, that's where all the power is given, and the state then doles out what the cities can do. And New York City then has its own set of laws to govern planning controls and things of that nature. But there's interplay there, and the people who write the state laws and the governor don't always get along with the people who write the city laws and the zoning and the mayor. So you get this real mix of stuff, and it makes it very difficult. And so rather than try to give you this rosy picture of what we have as a unified concept, I'm going to just talk about what we've tried to do in the last 5 years and focus, because I have 7 minutes, then we can talk about anything you want later, to talk about office to residential conversions, which is the thing that's been driving the adaptive reuse economy in New York City in the last 5 years. Okay, so you have these laws. You have the New York State multiple dwelling law enacted by the state, the real property tax law, the state law. Then you have like the zoning resolution that tells you, the shapes, the sizes, the floor areas, and then you have the building code. How do you construct it, right? So all these laws, govern it, and they're all written by different people, and they all have different interests, and they're written over different times and piled on top of each other. And what do we get? Okay, so let's see. Didn't move. We'll try it again. It's probably gonna do it twice now, right? Try again. There we go. So I'll go back one. I'll do that here. So the mayor, Eric Adams of New York City, called together a task force of people, and one of those circles is me. And that's the only reason I put that there. But it's to create recommendations about what we can do to make things easier in this hodgepodge of laws and regulations that are so complicated, to make it easier to facilitate the conversion of non-residential buildings to residential buildings, in particular office buildings. And the next slide shows you why that's so relevant. And I'm sure London has something similar. This was a graph put out by Brad Lander, who's the comptroller of the city of New York. He put this out this week. And what's stunning about this is not the blue line. The blue line are what he calls the 5-star Class A office buildings, really fancy ones on 6th Avenue or Hudson Yards, those kinds of fancy pants office buildings like the one I'm in now. From 2020 to today, to fourth quarter 2024, it looks like that's gone up by I don't know, maybe 10 million or so square square feet of occupancy, right? But then you look at the other, which is most of the office buildings in New York City, the brown and the gray line. They just go down, 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 down. I can read you the numbers. There's a 25, 30 million, whatever, 15 million. Huge amount of supply of office buildings, which are not the top-notch office buildings. And those buildings are languishing without tenants, and they're looking for purpose. And we knew this was coming, and that's why these regulations were attempted to be changed. So let's go through what some of those are. Let's see. Okay. All right. So the first one here, I put multiple dwelling law. Now, this one I don't want to talk about too much because it wasn't a real win. The state imposes a law on the city of New York that regulates the amount of floor area you can have on any particular lot. And that had an adverse consequence to certain more recently constructed buildings that wanted to convert large office buildings into apartment buildings and not worry about the zoning. And they didn't make it any easier. They made it a little bit easier. If you put some affordable housing in, then you can do it, but it doesn't really pencil out in most cases. But there is an ability to do that. It wasn't as successful as the city wanted, but as again, the city, the state, they have to get together, get along, and write their own laws in different ways. Okay, so let's go to the next one. There we go. So real property tax, oops, no, we'll go back one. The real property tax law, I'll wait till it catches up with me. The real property tax law, this was a pretty good win. It was a state legislative act, and it basically exempts real property tax. Think about a huge office building in New York City, how much they have to pay in real estate taxes every year. For construction period, no taxes. Next 25 to 35 years, depending on a bunch of formulas, no real estate taxes. What you have to do is put 25% of your units into an affordable housing regime where they're regulated, and the developers lose money on that, but they make a lot of money on the tax benefits. And overall, these rental projects are happening. There's many of them happening, and Brad Lander has that all in his report and talks about that. So that was a big change we knew had to happen, and that's facilitating the reuse of these buildings in a great way. Here we talk about the zoning resolution. This is the most sweeping. The most sweeping changes were the zoning resolution. We call it City of Yes. That's the marketing ploy, but it really did change the way that housing in New York City is done citywide, and particularly with respect to conversions. They expanded the eligibility from just certain narrow areas where big office buildings are to the entire city, to make it easy to convert these buildings with lax regulations that let you use windows on air courts and yards that aren't normally what you use for a new building. It really expanded the geographic area. It included the ability to put supportive housing and institutional housing and educational housing like dormitories into that rubric, and it's just changing the laws to make it easier to use these buildings. Let me go to the next one. So here, one other thing that it did is I do two at a time. That's what I do. They told me there would be a delay. So let's go back one. So the other thing that it did is it moved the timeline. And this chart, it's the same chart above and below, but with different colors on it. And basically, it tells you from the year 1900 to the year 2010, when were all the office buildings built in New York, right? And you can see, oh gosh, in the 20s, all the way until the Great Depression, that stopped in 1930, then it built up in the 60s. 1970s, there's a big bunch of it. And then in the 80s, look at all those square feet of office space built in New York City. And that orange band was not allowed to access these streamlined regulations. So they changed the law. Now it's 1990. So now all of those buildings built in 80 and 1990 now could access these regulations, which really make it much easier from a zoning perspective to convert. This was a fundamental change of how we do things in New York, and took a lot of effort, and it seems to have resulted in a lot of stuff. Other stuff that this zoning change, the sweeping zoning changes have done, is it makes it easier to basically convert things inside the building to uses that don't count as floor area. So you can throw some floor area on the top. You might call it an accounting gimmick, but what it does is we have buildings I've worked on where you added 4 or 5, 6 stories of building on the top just from rearranging stuff inside, right? And you do that with zoning, and that makes the whole project more viable, right? It took away some antiquated, difficult things about putting rooftop access. Lets you put the access for the recreation spaces elsewhere. So there's that. I didn't put here also, but there's a big other zoning effort to change areas of Midtown Manhattan that are zoned for manufacturing, turning them into residential or allow for residential with affordable housing. And that's actually having a big impact too. So that's zoning. And my last slide, because I know I only had like 6 minutes to get through this whole thing, is the building code. They have introduced a new law. It's not final yet, but it basically sweeps away the cobwebs of this ridiculous system where every architect has to learn a building code from 2022, 1968, 1938, and you follow these breadcrumbs and you have to open these dusty old books that are, and try to read codes about staircases from a long time ago, and we're replacing it with the existing building code, and that's going to make it a lot more streamlined and easier. So that's what the city is doing, trying to make it easier. But at the end of the day, it's still going to be a hodgepodge of messy, complicated laws that need a lot of experts to figure out, unfortunately. But that's what we have. So I'll pass it on to our next speaker, who's going to talk about an exciting project they did in Madison Square.
Thank you, James. That was really interesting. I'd just like to take a moment to remind the audience that there will be an opportunity to ask questions, so please keep sending your questions via the Q&A button below. Okay, I'll hand over to our final speaker, Andrew Werner, Senior Associate Principal at KPF, who will be presenting 1 Madison Avenue. Over to you, Andrew.
Thank you, Florence, and thank you, James, for the intro as well. Really great discussion on the conversion aspects from office to residential. And now we're going to look at a project that actually went office to office for a lot of reasons that we'll talk about in a second. It's called 1 Madison Avenue. And if my slides would advance here. Come on. There we'll go. There we go. So 1 Madison Avenue, this is at the corner of 23rd Street and Madison Avenue, adjacent to Madison Square Park, dead center in the middle of Manhattan. And what we did, so on the left here, an original building from the 1950s, we'll talk about the history in a second, about 950,000 square foot building with 200,000 square feet of unused development rights, which we turned into a tower on a base in approximately 6 years' time to that new construction on the right. So this was a job we did on behalf of SL Green and Hines that developed the project, and we did it alongside Severett Associates and JB&B as structural and mechanical engineers. So this is an incredible 24-hour neighborhood of Madison Square Park. There is excellent food and beverage offerings. There's a lot of residential and a lot of commercial space, but there is no new Class A commercial space. And this building is actually a vestige of the original Metropolitan Life Insurance campus, which actually has a really, really interesting history to it on Madison Square Park. So Metropolitan Life was actually the insurance company that first insured the limbs of Civil War soldiers in the United States. And they set up shop in the late 1800s on Madison Square Park and built a building called the Home Office Building, which is on our current site of 1 Madison Avenue. And over the next 150 years, they expanded northward and rebuilt, demolished, and built again across this entire campus, including what is now a landmarked 5 Madison Avenue clock tower by Napoleon Lebrun, which was built in 1909. And then in the 1950s, they actually revised the exterior of the Napoleon Lebrun Tower, demolished the original Home Office building, and built what was currently there at 1 Madison Avenue in the late 1950s. And this is a full block site, absolutely incredible, adjacent project and attached physically to the landmarked clock tower itself. So there's really a history of adaptive reuse throughout the evolution of the 19th and 20th century workplace that we had to really pull from to create a new 21st century workplace in this case. And the key to this, as James alluded to earlier with the hodgepodge of agencies and laws here, is that this is an as of right project, which means we did not need special approvals to do this work because the existing site had 220,000 square feet of unused zoning floor area already there. So there was an assumption that we would eventually come back and use it. So what we actually did is we took another 200,000 square feet off the top of the building and essentially chopped off the setback floors that were less efficient from the original podium to draw a clean line essentially at the deck of the 10th floor, and then combine those areas and create a new 450,000 square foot tower overbuild on top of the existing podium. And in the existing podium, we were able to retain 67% of the existing structure and all of the existing original Alabama limestone exteriors. So when this first came to us as a competition entry, SL Green had proposed adding a tower on this, but doing it in a way that basically reinforced hundreds of columns and beams in the project and added a mat foundation at the 10th floor and added a tower overbuild. And we were at the time coming off of a couple of projects, one of them being 390 Madison, which was just up the street on 47th Street, where we did this exact thing and had some really good lessons learned and said, you know what, we've gone through this process before, and it actually isn't the most efficient approach in doing hundreds of columns and beam reinforcements. It created an inefficient core. It created all sorts of inefficiencies in both cost and time. And we thought we had a better idea. So in working with Severed, our structural engineer, we developed an approach that was basically better, faster, cheaper, that also allowed us to create a much more efficient project and a much more 21st century focused workplace. So what this allowed us to do is by taking 4, or actually 8 in total, mega columns, we reinforced only 8 columns of the existing project, drilled a brand new core down to bedrock, and then placed a truss on top of those mega columns to carry the tower loads, and then the core carries the lateral load back from the new tower. So that actually creates a 12,000 square foot hole, which you can see in that upper right-hand image, that we drilled for the new core, and then we come back up out of that core with the new construction. By retaining the existing structure and the existing facade of the building, that allowed us to, that's 67% of the existing structure that was reused. It also allowed us to reduce our life cycle carbon analysis by 47%. By reusing all this. That's about equivalent to about 20 years of operational carbon in the building to retain this existing structure, which in New York is, I'd say, a bit less of a well-traveled area than it is in London. I think London has a great history of adaptive reuse that's continuing really well. And here in New York, we're just starting to get the hang of it, I'd say, because the American approach sometimes, unfortunately, is to clean slate and build again. But I think here, creating new from existing and repositioning this asset was absolutely the right way to go. In the combination of these two pieces, old and new, it also allowed us to pull those two pieces apart and create this incredible space at the 10th floor and then again at the rooftop to create over an acre of outdoor space that connects us back to Madison Square Park and really anchors the key offerings of this building to reposition this project into an absolute trophy Class A office. So the biggest piece of that obviously is access to the outdoors, improvisation of indoor air quality, light and air, larger, better windows with better air handling, and amenitization. As Luke alluded to at Broadgate, a big piece of this here was curated amenities to allow office workers to get things at grade that are both publicly accessible food and beverage and also private spaces accessible to all the office workers like a specialty rooftop above. And you can see here the construction sequence and how we pulled this off. So you can see here as we tear off the top of the building and drill the hole straight through the center of it, we start to come out with the wrapping of our mega columns. Again, only 8 columns in the whole building. And then as the new core is built up, what's incredible is the speed at which we were able to do this. So from the time of the addition of the tower truss in that bottom image to the topping off of the steel in the tower, that was roughly 3.5 months. So the speed at which we could do this was absolutely incredible and really transformed the process and really gave the developer an incredible amount of time and cost certainty for this. And we actually went back after we won the competition. We went back and stress tested it with SL Green and Hines and Tishman Construction, who was costing the project at the time, and proved out that doing this approach and basically taking a sledgehammer as opposed to going with a scalpel was actually the right approach for the project. And the key here is getting to what's shown here in the upper image, the tower. The most efficiency in yielding really good Class A 21st century office space are these huge tower floors and it's funny because they look very small compared to the podium down below it, but those tower floors are 28,000 square foot gross, about 35,000 square foot rentable, but that 60-foot 6-inch deep span from core to perimeter with no columns, and about 280 feet long in the east to west direction. That is that premium Class A office space that in New York City, it's ultimately reconfigurable, 10-foot ceilings, and you can rent this stuff for, $150 to $250 a square foot. So for the developer, the profit is really in how efficient you can make that office space. The beauty is that also gives us these really, really interesting podium floors where we've created a core that is biased to the north to also give us the northern side core for the tower, but these huge 85,000 square foot floor plates that are 425 feet east to west, but that provide really interesting, really great space that have gotten a lot of attention from tech firms, and actually IBM has taken this as their headquarters. So IBM actually occupies the lower floors in the podium, and then Franklin Templeton, the financial firm, occupies the upper floors of the tower. And the benefits here you can see on the slide as well is that northern side core really improves our energy efficiency by creating all this opaque wall system and then getting this really great southern light coming in on both sides. And then you'll see in a minute opening up the windows and creating new curtain wall systems in the podium really improves natural light penetration through that existing podium. So you can see here on the left, the existing windows in the podium were tiny little punched window openings, and they had these big, called them highboy radiators down below them. What we were able to do is remove those windows and the spandrel panels, retain the existing insulation and solid laminated limestone in between the windows, and replace them with these huge about 3 meter by 3 meter square apertures of new double glazed IGU's curtain wall system. So this greatly improved the energy efficiency, and even so, even better improving the energy efficiency was the existing limestone, which was from 1958, that was again solidly laminated to the exterior. And then by using a DOAS system, allowed us that's direct outdoor air supply, heating and air conditioning system, that also allowed us to reduce the duct sizes significantly throughout the existing podium, which allowed us to raise the ceiling heights from about 8'6" to almost 10 feet in some locations. And here's a shot of where the tower comes together with the existing podium, and you can see the expressed truss that does support all of those tower columns that then feeds down to the mega columns. And that is actually IBM's all hands floor. So they have this huge, incredible outdoor space. And then the floor above it, which Franklin Templeton is building out now for their terrace. And you can see Madison Square Park beyond, and you can see the new infilled curtain wall zippers of the existing podium, along with the existing Alabama limestone on the facade. And this is, again, this is where it all goes. Up in the tower, these are your 60-foot 6-inch by 280-foot long, 10-foot clear, and actually 10 foot to the transom and 11'6" to the underside of the steel. This is the ultimately reconfigurable space that is so valuable to all of these large blue chip companies today, that creates the value that allows us to do a project like this. And then to top it off, at the top on the roof, we have this incredible event space. We worked with David Rockwell on the interiors for this piece. And this is an event space that during the day is open to everyone in the office building to come up here and have lunch. So we actually have this integrated with a common space that's accessible off the lobby. People can grab and go and pick up food, come up here and sit outside or inside on the rooftop. And then actually they do happy hours after work up here. And then third parties can also rent this out for events. So it's a very in-demand space these days. But the curation of these types of amenity spaces throughout the building, both public and private, also creates this incredible space where people want to come to work every day, which was the biggest thing following COVID, especially, is to convince people to come back to work and come into the city. These are the places and the types of office buildings that get you to do that. And the final photo here, in context, you can see the building holding the street wall with its existing limestone facade, and then purposely deferential to, from a massing and architectural standpoint, the tower itself being purposely pulled away from the Napoleon Lebrun landmarked clock tower, purposely deferential and setting back really to accentuate the clock tower and hold the street against the park. So I'll turn it back to Florence. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrew. Fantastic presentation there. So I'd now like to bring all of our speakers together for our panel discussion and Q&As. And before we turn to the Q&As, I have a few questions for our panelists. And do feel free to step in if any of these relate to you as well. But I'll start with Kirsten. After hearing from James about the regulations and zoning barriers in NYC, What are today's biggest barriers to retrofit in the City of London, and what should the industry do to overcome them?
Thank you, Florence. So what we know is that older buildings were not designed to be adaptable, flexible, or demountable, and to be transformed to provide high quality floor spaces that Andrew just set out in the New York example, which is exactly what London wants. London occupiers want as well. And what we experienced is that many where they can be transformed, that this would usually end up with much higher carbon emissions, or at least equal to new build carbon emissions than the retrofit itself. So at the same time, our economic growth predictions identified need for more than 1 million square meters of best-in-class office floor space in the city alone by 2040. So what we define as best-in-class is commonly meant excellent transport connectivity, sufficient daylight, energy efficiency, high well-being credentials, indoor and outdoor green spaces, amenity and social spaces, and all these things should be able to be experienced by the occupiers. So getting there with a building, that existing older building, with the uncertainty about the quality of the existing structures is difficult, and obviously have a big impact on time and cost plans of development. So that's a problem we have, why we still see a lot of redevelopment in the city, especially in the tall building cluster. What we try to address, how we try to address it in our planning guidance is that firstly, we think as more and more retrofits are happening, we get more insights about techniques and technologies, and circular economy process will establish. So we're hoping that over time retrofit will become clearer. And this will then also help us to introduce firmer policy requirements. But in the meantime, what we're trying to push is the need for creative architects and designers that can ensure that occupiers can experience and appreciate retrofits, together with creating and strengthen special urban character in the city, which is a big benefit of existing buildings. So what we need is a culture change, and sort of making retrofit cool. And we all still try a step at it, but it's a difficult one. But perhaps I'm thinking maybe we should link it more to urban character rather than to exclusively to net zero ambitions. I'm not saying there are no net zero ambitions, but link it more to urban character, which is what many people and users better understand than the more abstract concept of net zero. So that's my answer.
That's a really nice point, and I think there's definitely lots of creativity and vision needed if we're going to keep pushing the dial. Luke, as you worked with the city on your scheme, can you tell us a bit more about the planning process for the repositioning of Broadgate Tower? I'd be especially interested to hear about the support you needed to build that ambitious public realm contribution as well.
Thanks, Florence. We embarked on kind of initial designs, concepts, and I think initially we were focusing on the pavilion, the addition to the existing tower, and working with the City of London. We've got a long-standing relationship with them in Broadgate, and it ended up being a really valuable push and pull and relationship in working through and spending more time and focus during that planning and pre-application process to enhance and improve the quality of the public realm. Fundamentally, we were losing some public realm by virtue of using the public realm outside of Broadgate Tower. So we wanted to really focus on improving the quality of the environment. Because of the nature of the buildings in the vicinity, it does have a microclimate of wind issues that have impacted kind of public realm initiatives in there over the last 15, 20 plus years. So we've been keen to undertake wind analysis with the city to ensure that any addition we are doing to the tower is done in a careful way where we're improving the microclimate to then give the public realm the best chance of survival and ultimately flourish. We've landed on a scheme that improves the biodiversity net gain in the area quite drastically, and we're really pleased with where we've landed with the city. And I think it's only through working with the local authority that we've got to an optimal outcome as we have.
Brilliant. Nice to hear. And over to you, James. I wonder in what way the regulatory and zoning changes introduced by the task force have shaped New York's current approach to office adaptive reuse and conversions. If you could speak a bit on that.
I think that these regulatory changes have made it a lot easier because what they do is they remove barriers and they permit more floor area to be constructed through additions within the buildings, and they allow it to happen in more places. So it's facilitating, right? Because when you talk about office buildings, some are never going to pan out as residential or other uses for that matter, just because of the way they're constructed. There's, the way their placement, their depths. Some will never really work. But when you can make it work, this now makes it a lot easier. It makes it in more places, and we're seeing a lot of that. I want to add something to what Kirsten said. In New York, I've seen projects where because they were built as, let's say, hotels or apartment buildings with 8-foot ceilings, or maybe they're office buildings where they're just a little bit too old. They're not really, you don't have the bones that Madison Park had with the ability to grow. They're just tearing down big buildings these days. JP Morgan tore down an enormous building to replace with an even bigger building, but it was a perfectly good office building, right? And these other ones that I'm seeing being torn down on Madison Avenue, they're just tearing down perfectly good office buildings, replacing them with something different. And apartment buildings with 8-foot ceilings are not enough. They want 10 or 12-foot ceilings in these luxury apartments, so they're just tearing things down. And it's kind of sad from a carbon emissions point of view and how that works. And sometimes you just can't help that. There's not anything you can do if people don't want the space that's there. So I just want to put a footnote to what Kristen was saying. So
Definitely. And I think actually London can learn a lot from other cities that have successful examples of office to resi conversions. I know that we definitely, it's an area we're working on. Andrew, I'd be interested to hear how you navigated the landmark and historic requirements for the coordination with 5 Madison Avenue Clock Tower, and where that we haven't really spoken about that tension between sort of heritage and sustainability, and how you navigated that in your project.
So I think one of the interesting pieces is that the clock tower itself obviously is landmarked. Our building is not, which allowed us to do a little bit more. But at the same time, the sensitivity to the landmark did cause us to obviously do this with a lot more caution. So reaching out with both the New York City Landmarks Commission and the Landmarks Conservancy, as well as local community boards and elected leaders, and getting everybody on board with our approaches was really big in the beginning of building consensus to the approach we had with the tower and the approach to retaining the pieces of the facade that we were keeping, which is frankly the vast majority of it, save for a small piece of curtain wall so that we could actually create separated entries and really announce the building on the park. But Landmarks Conservancy even had great commentary for us during the process early in design that actually talked about how to best hold the corner and where we should bring, I mean, even to the detailing aspects of as we're bringing the stone down, framing the storefront entries, which was a really great back and forth to have with Landmarks Conservancy and Peg Breen directly, because I think it was really productive. It made everybody a part of the process and it made the project better. So that was part one. Part two to that answer is a story that I don't get to tell a lot in these presentations, but the mechanical systems for the clock tower, which is now a hotel, sit inside of our building. So actually, they have a fully functioning hotel that continued to operate during the construction of our building. So we actually built an entire temporary mechanical plant inside our building and did effectively open heart surgery to keep their building running while we reconstructed ours and created new systems for them and then reattached them. And part of that was actually stripping back the setback floors and exposing pieces of the Napoleon LeBrun building that were never previously exposed in the last 100 years. So we worked very carefully with landmarks for something called a certificate of no effect. And that basically means do no harm, do no further harm, and cover up what was already previously covered and expose nothing that was previously unexposed. So we worked very hard with landmarks to make sure that as we pulled back the previous setback floors, that the scar that was left, which actually is full of mechanical systems that connect the two buildings, was replaced and refreshed sensitively with the original limestone. We went back to the original quarries from Alabama, the same people, the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren of the same, same guys in the quarry that quarried this in the early 1950s, to match the range and very carefully and sensitively do this so that landmarks would be on board and that the neighborhood and the city would be on board. So it was a really fun process and a piece that no one would have any idea looking at the building, that we literally did this entire open heart surgery to keep these two buildings stitched together.
Really, really great. And that's the beauty of retrofit projects. So we've got some questions coming in now. And I've got one for the panel, perhaps here from Louise Barfield from Arup. Question for the panel. Do you see emerging market demands for material reuse from concrete to facades in both London and New York, or is it still in its infancy? Does anyone want to give that one a go?
So I think I could kind of start to answer that in the context of reuse steel in the UK, and that's being, I think it's still relatively embryonic, but it's certainly being, when we kind of commenced the design of this, I think it was very much at its trial period. So we started design in 2021, but I think now across all projects it's being explored, and it's very kind of widespread in its use. I think there is still a process to go through to find. It's very much a just-in-time process in terms of establishing what's available at a given time when you need it, and going through the process of recertifying that. But it's certainly being explored on all projects that we're doing and our peers are doing in the UK. I think concrete is very much still it's on an embryonic stage, and looking at exploring different ways in which to minimize carbon. But we're certainly looking to do that in a number of our projects, but kind of more for use as trials in specific areas rather than critical areas such as kind of structural load-bearing aspects. We've sought to do kind of earth-friendly concrete in a number of public realm spaces, but yeah, I think there's still a bit of way to go, but we're trying to make some progress.
I would echo Luke's aspect here from the New York side. I think it's very much in its early stages. I know, funny enough, James, you brought up JP Morgan's headquarters at 270 Park, but I think they are, one of the things they did do is make a very big deal, I think, on the recycling aspect of all of that.
Oh, yeah. I didn't mean to say completely bad things about it.
No. There are plenty of economic aspects to that, but I think what they did do a good job of is, the aspects of downcycling and recycling, which I think was a first for the level of extensiveness of recycling, which was interesting to hear. But what I think actually is going to supercharge this further is probably the upcoming circularity guidelines and regulations that will go into effect in New York City. And I think looking at this from a circularity standpoint and a real life cycle analysis standpoint will start to supercharge that economy in recycling, downcycling, and reuse. That's my
because
hope.
Right now I don't see any like embryonic. I don't know if there's conception yet. I don't see any. Very, very little.
We have a question here on policy. How does the policy context of the 20th century ensure/jeopardize retrofit as an option for the built environment in NYC and London? Are we doing enough to make contemporary buildings retrofitable for the future?
From the policy perspective, there's obviously our groundbreaking GLA guidance, the London Plan guidance, which started to set the scene as to what we expect applicants to provide information, which is great. And I don't think there's a comparable move or policy move somewhere else in the world. So as far as I know, so that's great. So what we all know are busy doing is providing more detail to see to advise applicants on how they should respond to these policies in more detail in our various locations and for different building types, and that there's a lot happening also in terms of material reuse. What we just discussed, it's just at the moment too ad hoc and embryonic, yes, but for lots of materials, there's a lot happening in terms of reuse. And I think we should start small and do the easy bits first, and then make the way for the more complicated things, which is definitely concrete. It's very difficult at the moment, just being crushed. So I think there is a lot happening also for the new build projects, because people want the buildings to be really flexible and adaptable for the future, and that is definitely happening from my experience.
And Kirsten here, we just had another question through about 75 London Wall. I wonder whether you could speak a bit more about the sort of biggest challenges to that project from a planning permissions perspective. Yeah.
Planning permission-wise, it wasn't a problem at all because it did all the right things. It came into us not with an oven-ready scheme, what we've seen in the past, but they come in and say, look, that's what we want to do, maximize, update the building and bring it back to use. And they done amazing things about material reuse, especially all the fit-out items that need to be stripped, and very exemplary initiatives to make that happen. And there's a good case study, I think, also online about this project. And so this had sailed through the planning system. And it's a good way and implementation. Other schemes are struggling with explaining why they can't do certain things because obviously city stakeholders, residents, will say, why do we have to demolish the building? Can we retain it? So that people do not understand the subtle differences of why you can't retain certain parts of buildings or why you should or can. So that making people applicants to explain this so that the public and everybody understands what's happening. That's important, which is why we have started our optioneering guidance that should be demonstrated in applications and make people understand why certain decisions have been made for the development.
Great. And I'll shift the focus now to open a question to the panel. We haven't really talked about sort of risk and viability associated with retrofit projects. How can we sort of de-risk moving forward? And is there anything around sort of ensuring construction that we can be doing to push the dial on the retrofit agenda in both cities?
So I'll ask it from our perspective. In terms of the insurance market, I don't think we are seeing a kind of a premium associated with the existing property insurance, but I wouldn't suggest that that's kind of a determining factor on viability for schemes that we're looking at. In terms of risk, it's certainly something that enhances risk associated with the retention. And areas of retention and discovery. And discovery is a key feature of kind of contingency spend and risk associated with all our developments. But it's a fundamental feature we've got to approach head on in the context of the planning environment in central London. And the key to that is making sure that we inform our risk as much as possible prior to executing any building contract. And that largely takes the form of survey validations and making sure that we're clear as to what's going on below the ground, what's going on in the adjacent sites and within the existing building.
Knowing those bones is very important, right? One Madison Avenue succeeded because it was very clear. We did a lot of probes very early on. We were obviously very beneficial because Credit Suisse vacated the building 100% at the time, although we started early design as they were still working in the building. So we were doing selective demolition while they were still there, but doing those probes, doing all the archival research that we could, getting the original drawings from the building, bringing in structural engineers and civil engineers very early to analyze the building, the facade systems, the foundation systems was all really important to de-risking it, even coming down to asbestos abatement of existing insulation and analyzing the load of the existing columns and beams, analyzing the loads of the slab so that we could validate all these things. We went through tons of stress testing of the existing facades to compare them against current codes. So all of those things for us, I think, led to a de-risking of this project. In case of this building was overbuilt in 1958, it was built like a tank, which was really great for us. So it only made it better when we took that tank and put really, really efficient glazing systems back into it and made it a better building.
Fantastic. If no one has any further comments or any further questions, I'd like to bring our discussion to a close and thank all of our speakers for their fantastic contributions and everyone for joining us online today. Do check the NLA website at nla.london for upcoming events, research and other activities. Otherwise, thank you all and hope to see you very soon. Thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you very much.